So a lot of buzz around the Oregon Ducks. Oregon came in at number 6 last night in the initial college football playoff rankings. And the response around Oregon this week, I think, has been a lot of people kind of being put on notice with the Ducks. Now, if you've watched this show, we're not going to pat ourselves on the back and do this whole victory lap thing, but I'm just going to say, like, the line of scrimmage for us has always kind of been the appealing part about Oregon, and that's starting to show itself later in the season. They made a statement win against Utah, and right now with them sitting at number 6, you had Kirk Herbstreit last night say, hey, talking about the best teams in the country. He didn't outright say it, but he was like, I wouldn't want to play Oregon right now. I would not want to play Oregon right now from anybody else in college football. And so the question kind of starts like, is Oregon for real? And when I say for real, the question is Oregon good enough to play for a national title? Now, there's a lot of ball left to be played. Still have a fair amount of them in front of them on their schedule. But I'm here to tell you, yes, Oregon is good enough to play for a national title. First things first, make sure you subscribe right here. Oregon fans, had a lot of y'all join the party recently. We're glad to have y'all here. Make sure you're dialed in so you don't miss a minute of what we got going on here on the Hard Count on the On3 YouTube channel. We appreciate y'all in advance for that. So, the first thing we got to address about Oregon, there's kind of this perception around the Pac-12, and honestly, even with Oregon specifically as a brand, we don't think of Oregon historically as being this super tough, gritty team. We think of flash, we think of finesse, we think of cool uniforms, we think of fast, we think of Chip Kelly, no huddle. Like, that's all I think definitely a part of Oregon's history, but that's not what this Oregon team is right now. I'm going to reference this cinematic recap they had out from their game against Utah that the Oregon creative team put together. Y'all, they bodied it. First of all, it was a great watch, worth every single minute of your time. Second part of this, really educational recap. So what Dan Lanning says to his team in that cinematic recap, they're in the team meeting room, and he kind of asks this team, hey, what's our reputation nationally? And that was one of the things that his team said to him back was like, hey, flashy, not tough. That might be the reputation, but reputation and perception is not reality when it comes to this Oregon football team. They got some dudes up front. Across the offensive line, their starters, the average weight is 320. In the interior of that defensive line, so defensive tackle position, at the 2 deep, they're averaging 312 pounds. Translation, they're big, they're physical, they're built like a Big Ten team up front. I know they're going to that conference next year, but right now, I'm telling you, Oregon is built like a Big Ten team when it comes to the trenches. And so what that means is they're going to be able to match up with those teams that they could potentially play in the college football playoff. I'm not saying they're going to overpower Michigan or overpower Georgia, but I'm saying if you put them on a field tomorrow, it would not be a massive personnel disparity. They would have the ingredients to get it done. And they're playing like it to this point. 6.1 yards a carry offensively, number 1 in the country, allowing 3 yards a carry. It's good for number 12 in the country. So they're a Big Ten team up front at this point in time, and that's going to trend well into November. Because in November now, we say a lot on this show, in November, everyone's a little bit, I don't want to say out of gas, but everyone's kind of dinged up. Everyone's kind of hurt. Everyone's trying to find a way to push through. So the skill players that you have, you may have that effectiveness every single Saturday. You may not have it to the same degree that you had in September and October. So what does it go to? The big boys. It goes to those hosses on the line of scrimmage being able to move you against your will, those big human beings making you say, uncle. Do you have that? Do you not have that? If you don't have that, you don't stand a chance in November. Good news for Oregon, they have that. Like I said, can hang with those SEC and Big Ten teams in my mind should they end up playing them when it comes to the college football playoff. The other thing about this, and we said it about Georgia a lot last year, we're saying it about Michigan this year, but all teams that play for the college football playoff, that play for national titles, you have to have experience where it counts. And what I mean by that is at the quarterback position specifically, I understand it's a new offensive coordinator, but kind of the same system. Bo Nix has had like 1 million starts. There's not going to be a spot for him where he trots out there and it's just like, whoa, moment is too big for me. Play in the SEC. He understands big boy football. He's playing at Oregon right now. Walked out in that stadium last week against Utah in Salt Lake. And the Fox broadcast kind of zoomed in on Bo Nix to start the game. And he's almost like smirking. Like he almost thinks something's funny when he walks out on the field. And I was like, this dude's nuts. This dude has poise coming out of his ears. And they ended up taking a delay of game, which made it all the more bizarre. But then Oregon just continued to shred Utah. having a quarterback who's not going to have a moment too big for him, who's not going to, get knees weak, arms heavy, and have his mom spaghetti all over the place. Like, that's a guy that you need calling the shots for you. And Bo Nix has that. That's a part of their championship makeup in my mind. Other part of this, you look across the roster, and it reads like junior, senior, junior, senior, senior, junior, junior, senior. And that's pretty much the way it looks across the majority of these starting positions. Now, I'm not going to pretend they don't have some transfers that have added into the mix, but they have just become a part of this operation seamlessly. I'm not saying they don't have young guys that still contribute, but when you look at the majority of the guys that are getting meaningful minutes, the large majority, again, it's an adult football team. It's guys that could go purchase an adult beverage if they wanted to. Like, that's kind of the makeup of this team. Now, I wouldn't recommend purchasing many adult beverages during the season, but you hear what I'm saying. A lot of maturity, a lot of know how to handle themselves, a lot of we're here to execute and do business. That's how Oregon gets down. Now, the thing I would say about Oregon, the thing that makes me most encouraged about them when it comes to their college football playoff hopes and what they're going to do the rest of the way, like, they can fight multiple styles. And we said this a lot about Michigan in the offseason. We said this a lot about Georgia. So those are two teams that I'm comparing Oregon to multiple times throughout this segment. Should tell you how we feel about them. They can play any opponent. And I think however that game goes, they feel good about being able to play in the style of game. So to kind of put a broader point or finer point on this, they're going to try and dictate terms to you. Like, Oregon's trying to be who they are. They have an identity. But if it's a game where, hey, we got to score 15 to win the game, it's going to be a rock fight. They've got a great defense. Like, points are going to be at a premium. We got to find a way to win this game and score 15 and play good defense. I think they can do that by nature of how they're playing defensively right now in the line of scrimmage and by nature of how they're running the football. If it's a shootout, if they see Washington again, and I expect them to see Washington again, even though that game they lost by 3 points, if they find themselves in a track meet, I think they can win that kind of game as well, averaging 40 points a game right now. So whatever the recipe calls for on that day, they have the ingredients to get it done, which means they're not going to get to a spot where they play a Ohio State and they're just severely outmatched and they don't know what to do because Ohio State's playing a style that they can't keep up with. They've got all the tools to be able to keep up with anybody in the country. And so Dan Lanning now has taken what he's learned, in my mind, from Kirby Smart, from Nick Saban, two of the GOATs, and he set the competitive temperature for his team at this point at an elite level. Like, typically you would see after the close loss to Washington, it would be very much so human nature to have a letdown game against Washington State. I didn't see that. They throttled Washington State. And then you're going to the game at Utah, and you're like, well, where is this team's emotional tank at? They got to get up for another big-time game. They throttled Utah. Like, they don't have a week-to-week, how are we feeling? Are we up? Are we down? Do we feel good about ourselves? Like, they're just very much so machine-like, take care of business, mature, and a lot of that starts with Dan Lanning. A lot of that starts with the locker room. And I think actually it probably starts with Dan Lanning and ends with the locker room, but a great example of this, and we mentioned it in a one-off video when we had our Sunday sprint on this past weekend. Bo Nix, they're up 35-6, and there is, I think it's a third down where he drops back to pass, blitz in his face, he looks to his check down, and something just looked off about the play to where he kind of, eats it, throws it in the dirt near Bucky Irving's feet. And again, 35-6 is the score. Bo Nix comes off the sideline screaming at Bucky Irving. He's walking to the sideline, back to the bench, letting him know, like, hey, you did the wrong thing. And there's no thought of like, no big deal, we're up 35-6. It's no, hey, no problem. I understand there was a third down. We can just punt it away. We're going to win this football game anyway. Like, it was in the second half of the game, and Bo Nix is livid. Why? Because they have a standard they're trying to uphold. It's not Oregon versus Washington. It's not Oregon versus Ohio State. It's not Oregon versus Cal or USC. It is Oregon versus Oregon. And that's one thing to say. It's another to hold yourself to that standard in a situation where you're up 35-6. So that game, I think, told us a lot about where Oregon's at from a competitive excellence standpoint, from a competitive temperature standpoint. And a lot of that goes to Dan Lanning. Like I said, it ends and starts with that locker room being able to just be mature, handle business, and do what they do. So the buzz around Oregon, are they a college football playoff team? I believe so. I 1,000% believe they will be a team that ends up winning the Pac-12 and end up in the college football playoff. So we're calling our shot. We're doing it in November. So, I mean, how much skill is there in that? It is what it is. But regardless, Oregon, the buzz around them being a playoff team and a national title contender, that is 1,000% real. It's not just smoke and mirrors. It's not just them having some good games. It's like how they're made up internally and from a roster standpoint, real deal. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.